Guys, welcome back. And we previously discussed the launch of the IC system. And we said it basically happened at American Chemical Society conference with a bunch of scientists around. And Dionex was there selling the instrument. And Dow was there to explain the technology. And then off this process went. And it took off. And Dionex made tons of money over the selling of the IC instrument. I also said that the suppressor, they finally sunk in some money and they tried to get it to be improved. And then finally in 1979, we see that first major improvement, and Dionex went toward more of a membrane filter. This technology was kind of debated a little bit back and forth. There was a little bit of banter. And I think the reason, and most people think the reason, is because up until this point, the suppressor was a consumable. And they knew that they could make money off of that consumable because people would have to replace and buy again and replace and buy it again over and over and over. So this was a way that Dow could make some extra money, that Dionex could make some extra money because they're constantly selling new suppressor units all the time. In 1979, they finally made one improvement because people were complaining. And they knew that if it got out of hand and enough people complained, then the whole system's going to be thrown out the window and nobody would use the system anymore. So at this point is when they decided to maybe make a better suppressor unit that could not be replaced as much. And this is where some of that membrane technology came from. Now, again, we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we start talking about pieces and parts, because we'll do that with every single thing that comes around inside of the machine. We're going to do what we did with the GC system, and we're going to break it apart piece by piece, area by area, and talk about each section in a little bit more detail. So 1979, we finally start getting better suppressors that come into the market and come into the picture, and people become much happier with that IC system because of it. So here's a picture of an old Dionex ion chromatography system, and what you're seeing is that it has a conductivity detector on it, and this system is basically what they would use back in the day to separate these ions and to give us some peaks, particularly in the anion exchange world. Again, cations were great, but cations were really taken a part of atomic spectroscopy during that time, and here we have something that suits and meets the needs of a laboratory in a different area, and those are negative ions or anions. So if you take a look, you'll see this logo with Dionex. You know, quite honestly, they didn't change their logo hardly any at all from the day that they launched until the day that they were purchased out by another company. But here's the Dionex brand and the Dionex logo, and this is kind of the very first ion chromatography system that you would see back in the early 1980s to late 1980s and maybe early 1990s as well. Dionex, though, over the years, they got improved. They got a little fancier. They had a little bit more money. They could do basically a model of a more attractive looking on chromatography system, and this is kind of what they ended up doing. So what you saw is this kind of conversion over to touchscreen models. And these touchscreen models were there for people that didn't want to use a computer. So if you didn't want to be bothered about the software, if you didn't want to be bothered about, the mouse and the computer and the keyboard and the investment that comes along with it, you could easily turn this machine on and everything could be controlled by the software touchscreen that's built into the system up here at the very top. Now, you would still have to have some kind of printout, or you would still have to have some kind of printer access, but you did not require a computer and the software to be installed on the computer. Up here at the top, you see the mobile phase jug. The mobile phase jugs, basically, that mobile phase gets sucked in and it goes through the machine and it goes out the other end. And you're seeing some tubing that's coming out of here in the back. That's probably the drain tubing that's coming out of the machine. If liquid goes in, liquid's got to come out, and that's probably pointed into some type of drain bucket or drain vessel there that sits below in the floor. The front ends of these Dionex systems will open up, And inside of that area is where you'll see the column and the tubing and maybe access to a part of the detectors. And then over here to the other side, you'll see another Dionex IC system as well. Here in the front are a couple of trays. Those trays are just conical tubes, and those conical tubes are just used to put samples in. That way they'll be ready to go, and you can manually inject them one by one if that's what you want to do. These instruments, as you're seeing them here on the screen, those are manual inject instruments. That's why you do not see any autosamplers on them. You can order autosamplers for Dionex machines. This table, in this particular laboratory, they just don't have any. All right, so that's kind of the current version of a Dionex that you would see in a laboratory. Maybe not the most current, but you can kind of see the progression from what it was, which is here, to what it is now, a little bit closer at least, to this picture here. We do not use a Dionex, and we have chosen Metrohm instead. The reason that we've chosen Metrohm is because a lot of local laboratories use Metrohm and not Dionex, and the Metrohm units look something like this. All right, so what Metrohm decided to do is stand out from the crowd a little bit. So they knew Dionex was blue, and they wanted a competing color. So what they did is they chose green instead. And they made their instrument look a little fancier. As you can see here in the picture, it looks more updated. It looks more kind of in the now. And if you take a look at the instrument, it looks very high-tech. This is a see-through door, and you can see the pieces and parts as they work and as they turn without opening the door up. Ours, we don't have a see-through door. Ours is a little older model. Ours is a basic model, not a professional model. What you're seeing here is one that's called professional. This is what they would use maybe in an analytical laboratory somewhere. But what we have does just as good of a job. We might not be able to go to such a low conductivity detection though. But that's what you're seeing there in the screen. So the IC box is right there in front, and then down below in the middle, and then down below is the detection unit that you're seeing. Over to the right-hand side, you see the auto sampler that's there. So the auto sampler in this picture can take more than 36 samples. We have an auto sampler as well. Ours will only hold 36. That one's probably a 72 changer, or maybe even more. Who knows what that one is? But you can load up a bunch of samples on that auto sampler, let them run and run and run and run and run, and that auto injector or auto sampler will auto inject those samples for you into the IC one after one after one after one, and that goes into a computer model which is sitting right here to the left hand side with some software screens that are opened up for you to see. All right, so this is the Metrohm systems. Again, Metrohm slowly taking over, and for the most part, we have a very reliable system. Now, knock on wood, no major complications that have happened over the recent number of years, and we've been pretty lucky, and we keep our system pretty clean. So hopefully you'll continue that tradition, and you'll keep our system even cleaner throughout that process as well. All right, so there's the Metrohm IC systems, and there's the Dionex IC systems. So that's really what I want to talk about in this video. I don't want to go into any more detail. I'm going to stop it here. That's a good introduction and lead up to where we need to be when we talk about the theory of the IC system. So a little bit of history about how all of this technology came into play, what it was used for, why people decided to create it in the first place, and that led us up into today's model, which really is kind of a staple for any laboratory now. So very easy to use, very simple things that it's looking at. We'll use it for a number of different reasons, everything from pharmaceuticals to USP monographs, all the way to food and beverage, a little bit of oil and industry as well, chemical production, you name it. I mean, I can even put washing powders on the thing, for goodness sakes, right? So you name it, there's probably a use for an on chromatography system at some point in time. All right, so good luck with the assignments. I'm saying assignments because I'm unsure of whether I'm going to give you one or two at this point. but there's a lot of information to take in, and I think as long as you paid attention, you'll do perfectly okay on them. So in the next set of videos and the next section of lecture videos, we'll focus more on the lecture theory part. How does the machine work, and why does it work the way that it does, before we go into more of the pieces and parts that make the thing up. So good luck. Thanks for listening to my ramble of IC history. I think it's important for you to understand your ancestors that have came before you, especially those that have worked in the laboratory. So that way we don't take anything for granted, and we kind of understand the perspective of people as these systems are getting made and created.